debt and recession topped the news bulletin since President Muhammadu Buhari proposed the idea of acquiring $29.9 billion loan in Nigeria. How did the country arrive at this stage where a loan is necessary, or is it not? The expected result, possible strategy to achieve desired result will top our discussion of this episode of Big Story. You're welcome. I'm Amy Thompson. Nigeria's public debt stock as at June 30, 2016, as released by the Debt Management Office, shows that external debt for both the federal and state government is about 3.2 trillion naira. Domestic for federal government is 10.6 trillion naira, while states owe about 2.5 trillion naira, making a total of 16.3 trillion naira. 34.4% of this was incurred between July 2015 and June 2016.
Without going to the specifics of how the debt has been utilized, the greatest challenge Nigeria has faced in the last 1 year is a massive drop in revenue. And so that revenue has come across two areas. First, there's oil receipts, and then there's tax income. Oil receipts started coming down, as you know, because of the decline in oil prices. Then it was further impacted by the production cuts occasioned by the Niger Delta Avengers blowing up pipelines. So our production volumes went down. Unfortunately, I imagine they've borrowed more to fund recurrent expenditure rather than to fund capital expenditure, and which is why such a large jump, a large increase in debt might not augur well for the country if it's not corrected soon enough, particularly by diverting such borrowing towards long-term capital projects that can help drive the growth of the economy in the years ahead.
The situation in the country brings to memory the period before the debt relief deal of 2006. The country had been in debt to the tune of about $30 billion and had faced a number of limitations in the global economic scene.
Our debt profile started from when we borrowed $2 billion in the twilight of the military era, which was supposed to have been the same thing put into infrastructure and to some of these other things. But we saw years of profligacy and not servicing these debts. We saw the loans balloon to almost 30 billion. And it became a major issue. It affected our credit rating as a country, our ability to join the international, what was imagined as international financial, mainstream of international financial business at the time.
Eventually, the administration led by former President Olusegun Obasanjo won the Paris Club over with what they viewed as focused economic programs. Consequently, $18 billion was written off. After the cherry news, the federal government then promised that there was a consensus among government players that the nation won't go into that situation anymore. However, the economy currently is one in which we have made the current administration strategize towards acquiring more loan. The country was declared to be in recession after a 2.06% shrink in its gross domestic product in the second quarter of 2016 at about 23.5 million naira in nominal terms. The 2016 budget of about 6 trillion naira is with oil prices projected at $38 a barrel and a production estimate of 2.2 million barrels a day. Funding of the budget has, however, generated concern because of the over 17% contraction in oil output at about 1.69 million barrels a day and prices going below $30 at the beginning of 2016. On the bright side, though, the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ike Chioke, says that as at November the 1st, 2016, production is back up to 2.1 million barrels per day, and global prices hovering around $40, although this is after the country has spent a larger part of the year in a period of low revenue. These reasons and the obvious need for infrastructural development has prompted the President Muhammadu Buhari to propose a loan of about $30 billion. The federal government says it intends to borrow this within 3 years from the World Bank, African Development Bank, Japan International Cooperation Agency, as well as Islamic Development Bank and Exim Bank. The money would be targeted towards key infrastructure, poverty reduction through social safety net programs, governance, and financial management.
The external borrowing program, which Mr. President has placed before the National Assembly for approval, covering 3 years, is for the Federation. It covers projects in all the states of the Federation. As you know, in Nigeria, there's no physical geographical location called the federal government. So all the railways, all the rural water projects, all the education and health projects, all the road projects are in one state of the Federation or the other. Many of them, some of the projects are multi-state projects. So Nigerians have to appreciate that the borrowing program before the National Assembly is presented by the President because by the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. So the procedure, for example, is that states that need rural water supply, we made their submissions to the International Economic Relations Department of the Ministry of Finance, which aggregates. So the package that the President has presented is a package for the whole country, including the borrowing, external borrowing interests of all the states of the Federation. So that should be clear. So the borrowing is borrowing of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, the federal government, and the state governments. And almost all the projects are actually state projects.
Those in favor say aye. Those against say nay. Nays have it.
But these reasons seem insufficient to the Senate when the idea was presented to them.
The presentation from Mr. President was not complete. There wasn't an attachment that is required for consideration. So we felt that taking it to the committee level without members, citing the details of the borrowing plans. The details of the borrowing plan is absent. That is one of the major reasons.
This perception is shared by some Nigerians who believe that the strategy is a good one.
I think it's probably appropriate. I just think that the message has not been well communicated to Nigerians. You remember, it's part of the medium-term expenditure framework. So it's not like we're going to borrow $30 billion tomorrow. Or next year. It's actually planned over a 3-year window. And within that context of the $30 billion, they're just saying that the government would have a total overall exposure in dollars of about $30 billion. But the direct borrowing from the government is about $4.5 billion in Eurobonds. The other ones are counterpart funding. So take, for instance, your railway lines. You want to build a new railway line from Lagos to Kano, and maybe you've gotten the Chinese to agree to build it for you. And say, for instance, it's going to cost $2 billion. The Chinese might say, we will be willing to pay $1.5 billion of that, but we'll lend you the money, but you guys must bring $500 million. So the direct borrowing from the government, in that case, federal government would be $500 million. But the government has to recognize that the Chinese government is lending us $1.5 billion of goods and services to build that train line. So what has not been, I think, probably well communicated is the specifics of the projects, the contribution Nigeria is making, the amount that is coming from other sources to make up that $30 billion.
There are also opposing views on the basis of readiness to manage such responsibility.
We're still running an economy where more than 80% of our annual budget, still goes to recurrent expenditure. That borrowing plan is a signature for failure.
Orji Udemezue says he's not totally against borrowing. He's concerned about the amount.
If we say we need a loan, we shouldn't be needing anything more than, maybe 500 billion to 1 trillion naira in a year to fund our budget. But if you look at a budget where we tend to want to borrow an amount that is almost half of our own revenue generating capacity, that is dangerous for a country. Okay, Nigerian budget is how much, for example? Maybe 6 trillion now. Out of that 6 trillion, how much are we able to make on our own as revenue? About 4 trillion. Last year, not up to 3.8. That's budget, projection. In reality, it may be much less than that. How much are we owing as a country today? $63 billion. which is somewhere around 12, 13 trillion naira. By the time we execute this borrowing, we will get to somewhere around 102 or 103 billion dollars, which is somewhere, again, around 30-something trillion naira. For a nation that's still having a big challenge with revenue, why don't we straighten out our revenue challenges first before we can go on this borrowing strategy?
And for some, there are many unanswered questions.
So, I mean, in business, for example, I can still want to take a loan in this company, but I'm buying 15 Range Rovers, for example. Oh, it's a loan, it's a business loan, so I will say. But couldn't 15 Toyota Corollas or maybe 8 Toyota Corollas have done the job? So these are areas that I'm concerned about. What do we really want to do with the loans? Because I want to be able to see that every dollar that we say we are taking as loans, first, we do not have the capability to generate it in-house. And secondly, it is applied to the best area. And like I said, thirdly, it is applied in a manner that actually does create wealth and employment and new products in Nigeria.
While for others, it's antecedents.
So if I get the timing right and draw down, then I have funding to pay my contribution and get the contractors mobilized and working, and then having a strict discipline to monitor those contracts. Now, unfortunately, the government has not had a good track record on contract performance and monitoring contracts, because you can see when you check their debt profile, you see contractor liabilities are quite massive. I was reading the papers recently of contracts of going back in the 70s which had not been paid. God knows that they are making such payments today. You wonder, what did they actually do back then? And if you are going to incur $30 billion of debt over the next 2 to 3 years, and then you don't execute those projects, and then you end up not even paying the contractors for the work, then we enter a double jeopardy, where we've now, taken debt, but we don't have the project to show for it.
Some details of the proposal is what bothers business lawyer Mr. George Etomi. He believes that the safety net should be given a second thought.
Safety net creates the impression that you're a Father Christmas. Now, we don't have the full details of the safety net. But if the safety net will go to things like creating viable insurance schemes that's supporting existing insurance schemes that we have, just to create that sort of liquidity, supporting power, supporting some. If you, that's where you're directing your safety nets to. I can say, okay, they will complement your infrastructure. But if safety net is just simply to find some ways, because I've heard so many things, they will buy lunch or parks or whatever for school children. Some of the programs we're hearing, election promises, and our politicians are not short of it. It then creates an entitlement mentality amongst Nigerians. And once you give it, it's difficult for you to withdraw it. It becomes a major political thing to withdraw it.
Others are not very comfortable with the proposed counterpart funding aspect.
I've been exposed to understanding what multilateral loans mean. So quite a lot of loans and stuff that Nigeria will say they want to take are taken not in a smart manner. And I'll explain what I mean by smart manners to you. So somebody says, I'm lending you $1 billion. But let's unpack this $1 billion. Where are the jobs created by this $1 billion? So somebody's going to ship certain things manufactured in their country to you, going to be installed by their countrymen here, going to be maintained by their countrymen here, and that amounts to part of the loans we're talking about.
Well, there are certain things we don't have the know-how or the expertise or the technology to do. How do we move forward? We need to get started somehow. And I think it's important that you note the difference. Borrowing for investment, capital investment in Nigeria, is different from letting citizens go abroad and buy those equipment and consume it. Like if the government was to borrow to build an auto assembly plant that has 10,000 Nigerians employed, that's probably better than letting people go and change their money and keep on importing cars from abroad. You see, the latter continues to fuel jobs and employment abroad without creating any, supporting jobs in Nigeria. If we're borrowing for infrastructure, we are borrowing to create the enabling environment, which is what all we're talking about, for business to thrive in Nigeria.